Section 7, Masterlist Fields explained. Before I go into detail on this, let me explain what a field is. What a field is a nerdy database term referring to a particular type of information. Let me show you this because it's the best way to explain it. So this is the BARI master list. It has, I think to date, about 12,000 products in it. You see that on each line we have an observation, or each line pertains to a specific product. So we're starting here at the top, so we're mostly on our different draft beers beginning with numbers and the letter A. So they're observations on lines, and then the fields are the columns. So each field or column stores a specific type of information, such as the vessel ID, product ID. We're going to explain these in detail, but just to say, basically these are the categories of information that we need to store in our database that tell us everything to do with the different products. Obviously we start with kegs. You'll see some abbreviations in here, and obviously this is alphabetical. Quick shout out, we've got GD is Great Divide. It's one of my favorite Colorado breweries. Some of these will be familiar to them. LH is Left Hand, Lone Tree is another Colorado one. Some of the big boys in there just spotted. Miller, OB is Oscar Blues, another great Colorado brewery. Odell. This list is heavy, of course, in Colorado beers because we're here. Sam Adams, one of the great. Sierra, Stella Stone. There's a lot in here, and it continues to grow. Then we come into bottled beer. But anyway, that's what the fields are. They're the different columns that store pieces of information. So let me explain those in more detail here. So we have 17 of these fields or categories of information. The first two columns are the vessel ID and product ID. So we have names to identify all the different products and vessels, but names can be misspelt and confused. So in databases you typically have ID numbers, or what you'd call the key. They're the unique identifiers used to identify specific vessels and products. And note that the vessel IDs are never repeated. So every vessel ID is unique because there's no every different size vessel has its unique vessel ID, whereas product IDs are repeated. The reason for that is because you have different sizes of the same product. So using the Jack Daniels example, we have 3 different sized vessels, each with its own unique vessel ID. However, they share the same product ID, and that allows us to, or the database, to realize that these all contain the same products, and therefore it knows to collapse them all together. This distinction, as said, is particularly important for liquor category, since it allows us to collapse these different sizes together. Remember that for draft beer, bottled beer, and wine, we do not collapse different sizes together, and we treat them separately. So in those cases, they will have unique vessel IDs, unique product IDs, and we don't categorize them. So category is really simple. It's just the 5 major categories of draft beer, bottled beer, liquor, wine, and miscellaneous that we organize our products and vessels by. Within each of these 5 categories, there are a number of subcategories which further identify the type of specific product. So in our case of liquor, we have shot products, vodka products, gin, rum, tequila, whiskey, scotch, branded, sugar products. So those are all subcategories. Within draft beer, we've got draft domestic, draft import, and draft premium. Again, you'll become pretty familiar with them. But so a note on subcategories is because we have the subcategories, we don't include the name vodka in our vodkas because that information is stored in a different field. So don't put whiskey in the whiskey category, although we sometimes do include things like bourbon or rye, because that's almost like a subset, I guess, of the category or the subcategory whiskey. So product name, as I hope you know by now, is the name of a product like Jack Daniels. And while this is a specific size, it's basically talking generally about what is in, or the type of product, or the liquid, what we'd refer to as, what you'd order if you were at a bar. In the main category, liquor is the main category. We collapse different size vessels into the same product, but as we said, we don't do this for the other categories. For instance, Coors Light kegs are found in half-barrel full-size kegs, and also sixth-dill or sixth-barrel kegs. We separately name those, and so there's a separate product. Whereas with Jack Daniels, both a 750 and a liter would share the product name Jack Daniels. In the case of Coors Light, there is 2 product names. One would be Coors Light, and one will be Coors Light Sixth. Vessel name is the name given to each different size vessel. The names are designed so you can obviously recognize which vessel you have in your hand. As discussed, a vessel name includes a specific size. If it's the default, like if it's a litre bottle of Jack Daniels, it would just be called Jack Daniels. If it's anything that differs from the default for the category, so it's a 750 or a handle, then it will note 750 or 1.75. The vessel size, previously called unit size, but vessel size is the most descriptive, is simply the size of the container in ounces. So you'll become familiar with the common ones for draft beer. 1984 is the number of ounces in a half barrel keg. 1690 is the number in a Euro keg. 661 is the number in a sixtel keg. And I think it's, 993 is the number in a quarter barrel. Obviously 750s for wine or liquor will be 25.4, and then a litre is 33.82. I can obviously name these pretty quick. You will know those by heart very quickly, so don't worry too much about that. But the vessel size, I said, is the size of the container in ounces. Vessel tare, pretty straightforward, I hope. It's the weight of the vessel when it's empty. The weight of an empty keg, glass bottle or carton is used to measure exactly how much is in a vessel when you weigh ones which are half full. So obviously when you put a bottle onto the scale, you're weighing 2 or 3 things, including the pouring spout. You're weighing the glass, the product, and so it's necessary to subtract off the tare weight, or the weight of the glass, so we know how much the liquid inside weighs. There's 2 ways to figure out a tare weight. Either you need to have a completely empty one, that's the easiest one, in which case you just weigh the empty bottle and then you know straight away. If you have a completely full one, then you need to put it onto the scales, and then you can use the calculator within the software Saru. There's a worksheet named the tare, so the tare tab in the C tool, which will help you. Basically, you put in the raw weight or the weight of the full bottle, tell it the size and the density, and it will figure out for you what the tare weight is. Also note that we don't include the weight of the speed pouring spouts, which are commonly found on bottles for a number of reasons. So if you come across a new bottle, the aim is to get a completely full bottle that hasn't been opened, and we're going to disregard the pouring spouts for the following reasons. Most importantly, the pouring spout should always be found on the same bottle each time, so the extra weight will cancel each other out. What I mean by that is your well vodka should always have a pouring spout on it, and when you weigh it one week and next week it will have that same pouring spout. And so while if we don't include the pouring spout, it might say it's a tiny little bit more liquid in it than there really is, that will cancel out because that same pouring spout will be on there the next time around. The second reason we don't include them is that speed pouring spouts typically weigh less than half an ounce. I've found that 0.35 ounces is pretty common. It means that it's too small of a measurement to affect the results materially, particularly given that fact that a given bottle will have either have a pouring spout on consistently or not have a pouring spout on. And then also another complication is that different bars use different versions of pouring spouts. So if we were to try and include this, we'd have to have a different tare weight for every bar, and obviously that would become rather unmanageable. So obviously the metal ones weigh more than the plastic ones, etc., etc. You will almost certainly be asked about this by clients, and as with all things, it's important to establish our authority and our knowledge. So it's a good idea to be ready with those 3 explanations, because if you get asked simple questions and you give great answers and explain and make the client comfortable, after a couple of questions they'll stop asking you questions and they'll become comfortable that you're the expert that you are or becoming, and they'll have a level of faith in what you do. If you and are unable to provide good answers to them, then very quickly they lose faith in you, and you'll find that you get asked a lot of questions. The other point there is, whilst to some extent you can sort of blag your way through or make things up, if you really don't know the answer, it's much better to say, do you know what, that's a good question, I'm not sure, and then send me an email, send us an email, and we'll soon give you an explanation, because chances are we've thought about that before. Final point, any given bar ideally would only have one type of speed pourers. That will mean that they are consistent weights, of course, but it also means that they will pour at consistent speeds. So if you've got plastic ones that are wide-necked and then metal ones that are narrower, the liquid is going to come out at different speeds, and it's going to be difficult to use your pouring to pour precisely and accurately. Then the next columns, we call them vessel tags 1 to 4, or barcodes, but A few products don't have them. High-end wines are an annoying and typical example. Also, sometimes some high-end whiskies like Willette. But basically, most bars, most vessels will have a what's called a UPC code, or what you'll know as a barcode. They're already printed on the products, so they're consistent across the country. So there's no need for us to sort of add these in, but they're unique identifying codes which are assigned. There's some sort of system behind the scenes so that when Jack Daniel's comes out with a new product, they kind of apply for a certain UPC code, and then it's checked off the list, and no other product will be given that. So they're unique identifiers. And there's a few silly examples like Gosling Ginger Beer has the same UPC code on the liter bottles as on the cans, which is very strange. Only example of that I know of. The software has a space for 4 barcodes per vessel for a couple of reasons. One, because they sometimes change when they update the look or the vintage. Sometimes in the case of wine they might change. And also for bottled beers, typically they'll have 3 separate barcodes. They'll have one for the bottle, one for the 6-pack, and also one for the case. Be careful not to use the barcodes that come on the delivery labels. So when you get a case of Jack Daniel's in, it will have the UPC codes on the bottles. It will have a separate and different UPC code on the case, and then there's probably a delivery label on there which also has a barcode on it. And be careful to differentiate between the case code, which is printed or stuck onto the case by the manufacturer, and again will be the same all around the United States, versus the distributor labels, which will be specific to the local distributor and are not useful because they will change, and as I said, they will vary around the country. So again, there's sort of a collective benefit here that we all add this information in, and then we all benefit from it. But it's important to make that distinction and not get confused. Next one, pretty straightforward, is, well, I guess not actually that straightforward, but hopefully it'll become. So the density is basically a measure of how heavy things are for a given volume. The system that we use is based on the density of water. If you didn't know it, the system of metric measurement is all derived from water. What it means is that 1 kilogram is equal to 1 liter of water. If you didn't know, a kilogram is 1,000 grams and a liter is 1,000 milliliters. So you might think about the smallest measure of the metric system being 1 centimeter squared of water, which is 1 millimeter, which weighs 1 gram. Very nerdy. You learn something every day, huh? Anyway, so if water has a density of 1, then a liquid which is 2% less dense than water would have a density of 0.98. In actual fact, you find distilled spirits that have an ABV, an alcohol by volume, of typically 40% have a density of 0.9755. That is a vast majority of liquors in our system because most of them are distilled spirits. Then the minority of liqueurs and sugary products like Jaeger and triple sec, they are more dense than water, and so they have densities above 1, and they typically range from about 1.02 to 1.05. The difference is around 7% between that 0.9755 and 1.05, so it's worth accounting for. The reason we're having to deal with this is because, think about it, we're measuring volume. When we say 1.5 ounces, we're talking about 1.5 fluid ounces, which is a measure of volume. And just to explain, it is the amount of volume of water that weighs 1.5 ounces. Strange to get your head around because you hear the word ounce, and I certainly think of a weight, but fluid ounces is a measure of volume. The easiest way to figure out the density of a new product is to look at the density of similar items already in the master list. Particularly, you'll need to pay attention to the sugar content and ABV. So if it's a 40% distilled liquor, which will be most cases, it's 0.9755. And then for liqueurs, you can check up on triple sec, that sort of thing. And then for wine and beer, because they're much lower alcohol, the density is close enough to 1 that we leave it be and leave it as 1. And then of course for bottled beer, we don't care about this because we don't weigh bottles of beer, because once they're open, they're considered as having been used. Then case quantity is just simply the minimum number of vessels you can buy at once in a pack. So for kegs, it's always going to be 1 because you just buy kegs by 1. For cases, typically you buy them in cases of 24. Sometimes for bombers, those 22-ounce bottles, they'll be in 12s. Then for liquor, you'll find very, very common is 12 in a case. For higher end products, it's 6. same rule applies for wine, in that they typically come in 12, but the higher end products will come in 6. And then occasionally, off the top of my head, I can only think of Patron, but Patron Silver is a strange product that you can buy in cases of both 6s and 12s. So whenever you're invoicing Patron Silver, you need to pay attention to which size of case they're purchasing. Next up is distributor. So distributor is the name given to whichever company delivers the goods. In most cases, sometimes it'll be a state liquor store, in which case I guess they're not distributing it, but they're still selling it. So said considered a distributor. Most products are distributed by the big boys: Coors, Bud, Southern, National, Republic. But the more specialist products a bar carries, the larger the list of distributors they'll use. Other ones would be things like Classic, and it really varies by area and by state. It's important to list the correct distributor for every single vessel, as this is used to compile the order guides. So the order guide decides what needs to be ordered, and then it orders those products according to the distributor, so that here are the 5 things you need to order from Coors, here are the things you need to order from Southern, and so it's important that those distributors be entered correctly. The product size, as we talked about, is different from the vessel size in the case of liquor. So for draft beer, bottled and wine, the product size is always the same as the vessel size, since we don't collapse different sizes together. In the case of liquor, it's important, and it indicates the most common size that product is found in. So for example, Jack Daniel's comes in 750 milliliter bottles, liters, and 1.75s. However, liters are by far the most common, the bar liter, and so the product size for Jack Daniel's is, excuse me while I make that correction, so the product size for Jack Daniel's is therefore 33.82, which is the number of ounces in a liter. Note that all the different size Jack Daniel's vessels therefore have the same product size, as well as the same product name and product ID, and that allows them to be collapsed. The product size is used within the software to collapse different size vessels into a single product, and the point about that is we can report on the combined performance of Jack Daniel's. As we said earlier, the bar owners don't care which size of bottle a drink was poured out of, they just want to see if it's being poured and measured correctly. The subcategory number is a unique number which is associated with each different product subcategory. So those, like we talked about earlier, are things like vodka, gin, rum, whiskey. These unique identifiers are used to organize products into the correct order on client reports. So because we want to have them in a specific order, in the case of liquor it goes shot, vodka, gin, etc., etc., but those don't alphabetically follow the order we want to have them in, and so the way we get around this is to have numbers so they sort correctly. And then to get this right, you don't have to remember what these are, just simply steal the number from another vessel in the same subcategory. And then finally, the invoice name. We talked already about vessel names and product names. Well, the invoice name is something we added a while back. We didn't used to have it, but it's the name that appears on the delivery invoice. And the reason that's important is because sometimes it's difficult to recognize, to tie together what, from the label on the bottle looking at it and what they say on the invoice. Sometimes they're kind of cryptic, or it's a long name of a French wine. And so by having a separate field for the name as it appears on the invoice, it means we can always just look it up and it makes it clearer, and we have less confusion and we waste less time. So most of the time those products, the vessel name and invoice name will be the same, but when needed we copy them verbatim, meaning exactly letter for letter from the invoice, and it makes it easier to recognize that exact product when you're entering invoices. And just to say it, annoyingly of course, because the distributors vary by distributor zone and by state, etc., the invoice names will vary. So while the vessel names and product names are fixed in every distributor zone across the country, the invoice names vary by state and by distributor zone, so that we can look it up regardless of where the client is purchasing it from. Thank you for watching. Next up we'll talk about the count worksheet.